Uh-oh, Father's Day is right around the corner and you haven't gotten your dad anything yet. Don't worry, that's where the sponsor of today's show, Manscaped, comes in. You and I both know he needs some serious grooming in his life, so grab your dad the Performance Package 4.0 and he'll thank you for helping him tame his beast. It's a win-win situation for both mom and dad. Go to manscaped.com and use promo code RINKRAT, that is RINKRAT, for 20% off and free shipping. That's 20% off and free shipping at manscaped.com using the promo code RINKRAT. Don't forget that you came from your dad's balls. This year, show your original home some love with Manscaped. All right, welcome everyone to the Rink Rat Report podcast, NHL Draft Edition. It's finally here. And who better than to have on the podcast than Sam Cosentino from Sportsnet. Sam, thank you for coming on today.
Yeah, Joey, looking forward to the conversation. Thanks for having me.
Of course. And I did want to plug that for today's show, we are on YouTube. So make sure to head over to our YouTube channel and hit the subscribe button, smash the like button on the video. It really helps us out. So let's get into the draft. I think the biggest question mark is obviously not number one. We all know it's going to be Connor Bedard. That's not a very good secret. But there is a player in Matvei Michkov who we seem to have no idea where he's going in this draft. Obviously a very talented player because of, geopolitical issues. But Sam, where do you see Matvei Michkov falling in this NHL draft?
I think there's three likely destinations, and it starts for me at number 6 with the Arizona Coyotes. And if you think about the timeline and that hockey club not essentially having a home beyond this year, that would be a team that could look at a contract situation and understand that he could probably play out his KHL contract for another 3 years and then come over. And you hope by that point Arizona saga is settled, whether they move or get a new arena built somewhere else in Arizona. He would fit the timeline there. The second part that makes me think that might be a destination is because Arizona also picks at 12. And so you're going to get a really good player there as well. So that option exists. And then if we look at the Washington Capitals, for obvious reasons, the connection to Ovi, a lot of people have compared Michkov's goal scoring ability, not the way he scores, but his goal scoring ability to Alexander Ovechkin. And I think from a geopolitical standpoint, there might be some hurdles that might be a little more easily cleared through Washington and the organization there than maybe anywhere else. And I suppose the last place you'd look at would be at pick number 9. The Detroit Red Wings are picking there. Steve Yzerman has a great history with a number of Russian players that he won Stanley Cups with. And so maybe there's a path there for a team that probably needs to, continue to increase its forward skill and talent. So those would be the 3 likely destinations for me. We'll see how things play out. But it's a fascinating story and will be one to follow right up to and beyond the draft for sure.
Yeah, he did say, I heard somewhere that he was going to be at the draft, so that's a little bit encouraging. So, anyways, geopolitical situation aside, if Matvei Michkov didn't have this hurdle of the contract and being in Russia, from a talent standpoint, where would you put Matvei Michkov in your rankings for this draft?
Well, we probably would have been talking about him alongside Connor Bedard, and it would have been a 1-2, a McDavid Eichel thing. It might have been I know different draft years, but a Crosby Ovechkin type of thing. But he'd be a top 3 guy. At the very least, a top 5 guy. I mean, it's hard to deny what Leo Carlsson and Adam Fantilli have done. They're bigger players, and size always has a bias after the Stanley Cup. So, but I think just from a pure talent perspective and the ability to produce, I think he's probably in the 2 hole. But those 2 things are, the geopolitical stuff can't be overlooked, the contract can't be overlooked, the family situation can't be overlooked, and those things are all going to play a part in whatever club decides to draft him.
Exactly. I think it was Tarasenko and both Kuznetsov. They both took a while to get over here, and even I think Malkin, there was hurdles as well. So not the first time that this has happened, and probably won't be the last there. So in terms of Connor Bedard, I mean, it's, as I mentioned, pretty obvious he's going number 1 overall, Chicago Blackhawks. If you were to put a a guesstimation on how many points he puts up next year with the Blackhawks? I know we don't know what they're going to do in free agency and trades and such, but as it sits right now, how many points would you project Connor Bedard to have next year?
60, 30 and 30, I think are reasonable goals. And that's, the one concern would be, what is he going to be surrounded by? I think, listen, there's still really good NHL players, not walking into a situation with a McDavid and Draisaitl, obviously, where those projections would change. But I think on his own and most likely being a first power play guy is going to allow him to get to that 30 plateau. And I think the playmaking is something that has improved this year, but also something that when playing with NHL players will look really, really good. So I think 60s is an estimate for me, but I'd look at the 30-30 scenario. If he went beyond that and put up a point per game, 75, 80 points, that wouldn't surprise me either. He's really, really talented.
So the floor at 60. So make sure to pick him up in your fantasy hockey pools, because sky's the limit with that kid. So in terms of this draft, every year we kind of see a guy that was on the board for, on the board up pretty high on everyone's list, but then ends up available at the lower parts of the draft. I mean, in terms of guys that the Leafs have picked, I remember Jeremy Bracco was a big faller that they selected. Matt Finn was a faller that they selected. Who do you see falling down the list this year, if you were to guess one guy?
Cam Allen would probably be the guy, defenseman out of Guelph, the captain of the Linka team that won gold last August in Red Deer. And coming out of that, I think there were many projections, myself included, that had him likely being the first defenseman off the board. So Cam got into the regular season with Guelph, a lot of pressure on himself, and this is draft year, a lot of expectations for a Guelph team that did well the year previous. And none of those things really came to fruition. And I think Cam put a ton of pressure on himself, having to replicate what he did and go beyond his really good 16-year-old season. And I also think that the comparisons to Drew Doughty probably played a part in things. But if Cam can identify that he needs to play a simple game with some physicality and move pucks quickly and efficiently, I think he can be an effective NHL defenseman. But I also think he's sort of in that mold right now that he produced with Guelph, he produced at the Hlinka, captain at the Hlinka. Where does he find himself? And that self-awareness and identity are probably the things that teams are questioning right now. So I look at him as being probably a back half of the second round type of guy, but I do think there is value there.
Okay, awesome. And then in terms of, let's go the other way, who do you think's a guy that's might surprise people where he gets picked in terms of being high on the draft board?
Joe, it's been a little bit less lately because a lot of teams are onto him, but my partner at Sportsnet, Jason Bukala, identified in November when we were at the Five Nations tournament in Plymouth that that Tom Willander, the defenseman for Sweden, it would be a guy that he felt really strongly about. And, when you look at the defensemen in this class, the top three guys, Reinbacher and Willander, Axel Sandin Palika, are all right-hand shot guys. So not one has an edge there. I think Reinbacher's still the first to go. I do think ASP will probably go second, but I think Willander will be the third defenseman off the board. And I think all three of them will end up in the top 16 picks. So he's the guy to me that if you go back to the start of the year and even into January is probably the biggest riser.
Okay, fair enough. Kind of an off the board question I'm going to ask here. So we've seen, obviously these kids are 18. They're still very young. We don't see many players play in the NHL the next season. How many? So we know Bedard's probably going to be there, possibly Fantilli. And then Leo Carlson could compete as well. How many total first round picks from this year do you see playing NHL games next year?
Well, I think you'll probably see, there always ends up being a couple of surprises in camp where the player gets to extend or where the team might look at the situation in which the player is going back to and say, you know what, we're better off to keep him around here for a little while. I think that happens every year in the draft. So let's look at those top three guys as ones that I feel will stay the entire year in the National Hockey League, or at least have the potential to do so. But after that, you're probably looking at 4 or 5 guys. To pinpoint names is really challenging since
Mhm.
we're here at the start of the summer and you don't know what player is going into what situation. But there'll be 4 or 5 more guys that I think at least get into some NHL games. In terms of being able to sustain a spot in an NHL lineup all year long, you're probably just looking at the top 3.
Yeah, and would you say that's above average compared to other drafts, simply because it seems like this draft is pretty loaded?
Yeah, it seems that way to me too, and I do feel that the scouts feel that way. That there's going to be plenty of talent available well into round 2 and maybe even the early stages of round 3. So you don't typically hear that. Um, but I think it was in the same place some 20 years ago in Nashville where we had the '03 draft, and that's the draft class we're still talking about.
Wow, that's right. That's right. Few less frosted tips in this class, but who knows? Maybe a couple kids make a trip to the barber beforehand. But damn, you just reminded me of that. I got to start circulating that picture. It's a rock star picture. Um, Next question. Now I have, obviously this is a Leafs podcast. The Leafs are selecting 28th right now, which is where the Bruins were originally. It's the Bruins pick that they got from Washington. Who do you see the Leafs picking at 28th, or do you see a trade going on? What do you think the Leafs do there?
Well, it's interesting. You got a new general manager, so there is going to be that carrot of making that first round pick. But at 28, in any draft, even the draft as deep as this one, there's still going to be a fall off. So when I look at the limited number of picks available, I look at a general manager who's new on the job. He might want a few more darts at the dartboard. So I would definitely think that there is a possibility that exists there for a trade back scenario. So we'll keep an eye on that. But again, you have to kind of pay attention to what's going on in terms of who gets drafted in front of them and what player might be available. I guess if I had to target a player right now, a guy like Nick Lardis would be someone that I'd think about, knowing that Wes Clark, who was the head scout for Kyle Dubas, still remains there under Brad Treliving, at least until July 1st, and things might change after that. So smallish, skilled, speedy guys is right up his alley, and Lardis fits that bill.
That's true. That's true. I mean, I saw someone, I think it was Chase McCallum on Twitter, was mentioning how it was actually the Leafs and the Flames from 2016 onwards. I want to say they really like to pick those like high point total guys from the CHL, high NHLE, I guess is the term they used there. So, but I do see that as well. I mean, the Leafs have kind of traded a lot of their, not kind of, they have traded a lot of their draft capital at the deadlines. Why not trade back, try to take a few more darts? I mean, we have seen the Leafs do that plenty of times too under Dubas. So that's not surprising there. And even last year too, they did it. So,
Yeah, I'm just going to look here at so they pick round 1 and then they don't pick again until the 5th round. So 3 picks in this draft, new general manager, that screams trade back to me, but we'll see how it goes.
Exactly. Yeah. Or a trade too. You never know what's going to happen at the draft there. But um anyways, so are there, in terms of, on the topic of trading picks, do you think that there is one team, we'll format it this way. Is there a team that's hot in terms of, yes, this team, I could easily see them trading their pick, a 50-50, and a dark horse in terms of teams that are looking to trade their first round pick?
Well, I'd be really fascinated with Arizona picking at 6 and 12. That if they could package those 2 picks and get into a top 4 or 5 scenario, I don't know if that's going to happen, but that would be pretty interesting. And I think Arizona is taking calls. I know Columbus is taking a bunch of calls on its pick at 3. I don't feel like they're in the market to move. Maybe some immediate help if it presents itself in some sort of trade scenario. But when you're looking at, we have 8 teams that have multiple first round picks. Someone going to be clamoring to get back in there is a situation. I'm just looking at my draft sheet here. Pittsburgh's got its fair amount of picks. They don't have one in the 2nd round. Maybe that's something that they would move into. But in terms of trade up scenarios, boy, I'm not sure that anyone really wants to move outside of the top 10. I mean, you have a couple of teams in there like Arizona, like Detroit, like St. Louis at 10 that have multiple first round picks anyway. So unless you're talking about one of those teams packaging the other first round pick they have to move to take a big move upward. I just don't know if that's going to be a possibility. But when you're talking about the teams that don't have that first round pick, the Boston, Dallas, Edmonton, Florida, LA, Jersey, the Islanders, Ottawa, and Tampa Bay, might be interesting that if Ottawa is able to get some new people in with the ownership change, that maybe they do something. So anyways, that's more of a, you get a better sense of that the closer you get to the draft. But I'm really fascinated by those teams that have 2 first round picks, especially with one of them in the top 10, and that's Detroit, St. Louis, and then of course you got Arizona at 6 and 12. So some fascinating things to consider and to discuss there.
Yeah, and it's can't be discounted, like in terms of what direction are certain teams taking. I mean, we saw St. Louis trade away a bunch of guys at the deadline. They now have 2 first round picks, but what are they looking to do there? They locked up Jordan Kyrou, they locked up Robert Thomas, they have Jordan Binnington and Parayko for a few more years. Are they looking to trade Parayko, get another first round pick? Like that's also going to be something, and even Boston too. What's going to go on there? So few things there.
So often, the salary cap dictates, right? So when you have your unrestricted guys and you got to find a way to fit them into the cap scenario, the draft is usually a pretty good way to facilitate a lot of those deals. But again, how excited are teams going to be to move out, of the first round of this draft? And I think that's why so many teams have loaded up to get multiple picks in the first round. But no question, the salary cap is always going to play a part in that. And that might be, like you say, an existing player with term who might be a little bit more valuable, who might bring you something more back. But again, those scenarios usually play themselves out a little closer to the draft.
Of course, yeah. And we're still 12 days out recording this now. But one thing I wanted to bring up, we mentioned the trades and teams that might be looking to move. There are a few players that have been rumored that they're not re-signing with their clubs. Coincidentally, 2 of them are Canadian, in Pierre-Luc Dubois and Alex DeBrincat. If you were to kind of throw a dart and guess, who do you think, we'll start with DeBrincat, who do you think goes after DeBrincat if Ottawa's looking to trade him?
Yeah, I think there's going to be, there's be a lot of teams in the market for him. I mean, who doesn't want a scoring winger with really good track record? It took him a little while to get going last year. Snake bitten at the start of the year, but I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities, for him to kind of get going again. And what that destination looks like. Again, for me, it's pretty tough to sit here and say, hey, who needs this? Who needs that? Who's in a salary cap crunch? Who's not? I think though that a team that's going to acquire him is going to want to acquire him in a situation where they're going to be able to get him done long term. So, does that up the value? Does that down the value? He kind of holds the cards, but then again, is it a situation that it has to get done at the draft? Maybe not. Maybe there's more value for teams when, the salary cap isn't quite a factor once you get to the trade deadline. So, you're looking at some of those names. Pierre-Luc Dubois looks, he's obviously identified Montreal as being a destination. Is that a road Montreal wants to go down right now? Do they want to wait their turn and wait till free agency hits? What is Winnipeg? Who are they going to be able to exact the best price from? And as the market softened a little bit, because he's been so clear in identifying Montreal as his top destination. So I just think at this point, there's just so many questions. It's tough to give answers and really pinpoint destinations for players who are technically still under contract with their clubs. I mean, who knows what happens with DeBrincat? Maybe it's a situation where the new ownership actually takes hold or is having some backroom conversation saying, hey, we really want you to be part of this thing moving forward. And he changes his mind. So again, so many moving parts there. Tough to make those determinations.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, you could just sit here and throw darts at the board, but I mean, anyone can really do that too, right? It's not the best journalism. So going back to the draft now, who do you think is the most underrated prospect storyline that deserves a little bit more media attention? I know you at the draft, you love to, you do a really good job of bringing the story of the players to life and showing that they're more than a hockey player. So is there a player that you think that?
Yeah, I mean, I think Colby Barlow's a really good story, from Aurelia, and had to move to and wanted to move to go and play as his junior hockey, as minor hockey rather, in the Toronto area, and it worked out well for him. 46 goals this year. I mean, he was already a pretty highly projected guy. Um, probably not much in terms of growth. He's walking around with a full beard, so you're kind of, what you see is what you get. But this guy's loaded with character. I love the young man. I just think he's a wonderful story, and I think that in his situation, having to travel, or at least have his family be split up a little bit while he pursued his minor hockey, is kind of a cool background to him, and to see what he's done here. 30 goals and 46 goals. Gutting it out while playing with a hip flexor issue at the under 18s, but also winning a gold medal in the summer at the Helenka. A lot of neat stuff there surrounding Colby Barlow. So not only do I think he's a wonderful story, I think he's a wonderful young man, and I think highly of the young man, and I think good things are in the future for him.
Yeah, it is crazy when kids do that. It's not the first time and probably not the last time we see that. We saw that with the Robertsons, and we saw that with Owen Tippett as well. So, and to think, like, at 15 years old, you got to kind of bet on yourself, and to be so mature to do something like that is quite incredible to see. You can't say enough good things about that, right?
Oh yeah, and scouts are looking at that stuff. They know what's up. They've done their background. They know what the story is behind these guys, and Colby's he's a wonderful story, and again, a wonderful young man.
Exactly. Do you have any other kids that you wanted to highlight their story there?
Well, I think Nick Lardis is another guy. I mean, he's a guy that I went into Peterborough last year, chasing Shane Wright around, and got into the Peterborough room and talked to the coaches, and they were really, really high on what Nick was bringing to the table. But as an older team, there just wasn't really an opportunity for him. And then, of course, Peterborough went all in. It turned out to be a really good deal because they won an OHL title and made it to the Memorial Cup. But the benefactor of that trade was no doubt the Hamilton Bulldogs, getting Nick Lardis. 25 goals after the trade, 37 on the year, really light on his skates, shoots the puck a ton, flies. So he's another guy too that I think is a pretty cool story, knowing how he took advantage of an opportunity to be, once he got traded from Peterborough to Hamilton. And I think oftentimes the junior leagues get a bad rap for what happens in trades and kids having to move and reestablish themselves with different billet families and schools. But oftentimes, in a hockey perspective, works out pretty good.
Exactly. And we do see that a lot. I mean, Ryan Strome was a kid that was traded in his first year. Giovanni Smith, another kid. I think both those guys were actually traded from Barrie in their first
Yeah, I
years
think
there, and
you're
it
right.
ends up working. But yeah, for Nick Lardis to be moved in his draft year like that, you don't see that too often, but clearly it worked out there. But yeah, on that topic of the OHL, I hate how you can pick a kid first round at 16 years old, you bring him in, and then you have to uproot him, and you can uproot him and trade him somewhere else, but you can't trade a first round pick. I don't know. In my personal opinion, it's probably something to look into there, right?
Yeah, I mean, they used to be able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So that rule has changed over the course of time, and who knows if there's an impetus to change it back. I mean, that could very well be the case. But again, rather than moving bodies, sometimes moving picks is a little bit easier because you're not uprooting young men.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Exactly. Do you have, to close out our my last question I have about the draft here? Who's a kind of sleeper pick that you see going in the mid to late rounds that has really impressed you this year?
Oh man, in terms of one of those sleeper guys, I mean, let me think long and hard about that. Danny Nelson is a really interesting guy, centerman for the U.S. Under 18 program, a converted defenseman, 6'3", 210 pounds. Can win draws, can PK a little bit, can score a little bit. He's kind of he's an all around two-way center type of guy, but can play with a little bump in his game. So he's probably not a mid-round guy. He's who knows? He might end up going at the end of the first round, maybe somewhere in round number 2. So that would be a guy. Nathaniel Days, a goalie, plays with the Flint Firebirds. He's a guy who down the stretch unseated Will Cranley, a drafted prospect by St. Louis, to take over the Nets. ended up playing in all the 7 games for Flint in the playoffs. 6'2" guy, who had a late season emergence. Maybe people were paying attention to him. He'd be more of that mid to late round type of guy you'd be thinking about, and of course the position lends itself to that.
Exactly. Yeah, you never really see. It's rare to see goalies go in the first round anymore. I mean, we had that
Yeah,
little bit of a run with Askarov and Knight and Ottinger.
Ottinger, yeah.
Yeah, I haven't seen too many since. It's kind of interesting to see because like a goalie needs to be such a physical specimen and put up good numbers early on for them to go in that first round, be identified and take that risk in the first round. That most of the time you'd rather go to the second to 7th round and let them season a little bit more, right?
Yeah, they take a lot of time. I mean, you play the position, you know how it works. It takes a lot of time to be able to hone your game at that position,
Mm-hmm.
to be effective in the National Hockey League. I tend to look at about a 7-year period for that. So that's not something as a general manager I want to expend a pick on. By the time you're 25, that's when I think goalies really start to get good. So drafted at 18, 7 years from there, it's more the long play with that position for sure.
Exactly. And I find it's because like when you're a younger forward, a younger defenseman, you can kind of simplify your game. You can play depth roles. You can play in the 4th line and kind of chip and chase and then learn and develop from there. And by the time you're 25, you move up in the lineup. As a goalie, you need to figure out both the game and your physical aspects all at once, or else you're not going to have a fun time in the NHL, right? So 20, I see 25 is around. I completely agree with that.
Yeah, it takes a while. You got to play a lot of games, and a lot of goalies, like previous to their draft year, don't get a chance to play in a lot of games. So they're almost in many cases behind the 8 ball to start with.
Exactly. That's all I had for today, Sam. Thank you so much for coming on today. Again, we're going to mention the organization you're a part of, Hockey. I'm butchering this, but Hockey Donates Blood.
Hockey Gives Blood. Yep.
Hockey
I
Gives
haven't.
Blood.
I got to get in there actually and make my next donation. But if you get an opportunity, it's a pretty simple process, and the hockey community is doing a real good job to support it. Men, women, Olympians, junior players, NHL players. It's really starting to take a foothold here, and it's for a great cause.
Exactly. I got to go too. I haven't been in a while. Terrible. But anyway, Sam, again, thank you so much for coming on. Draft day, we're really excited.
All right. Yeah. Thanks a lot, Joey. Good talking to you.